You cannot break a spirit that has already survived the worst storms the world has to throw at it. Join us for the epic tales of modern-day titans who rose from the ruins to claim their victory. Click subscribe now and find your own unbreakable spirit today.
Sign the house over to your brother or get out of this family for good. My stepfather didn't raise his voice. That was the part that scared me most. He said it the way you'd read a grocery list. I was 31 years old, standing in the kitchen I'd grown up in, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. My half-brother was leaning against the counter behind him, arms crossed, watching me. The way a cat watches a bird it's already decided to catch. My mother was at the table, not looking at either of us, turning a spoon over and over in her hands. I set the mug down. I did not yell. I did not cry. I said, I need to think about it, and I watched my stepfather's face settle into the particular satisfaction of a man who believes he has already won. He hadn't. But I needed him to believe that for a little while longer. My name isn't important. What matters is what I do for a living. I'm a forensic auditor. Companies hire me when they suspect money has gone missing and they need someone to prove it, trace it, and document it in a way that holds up in federal court. I spend my days reconstructing financial crimes from spreadsheets and bank statements and the tiny digital footprints that people leave behind when they think no one is watching. I am very good at my job. The irony of my life is that I spent 15 years hunting financial predators professionally, while the ones living in my childhood home were picking my pockets the entire time. To understand how I ended up in that kitchen, you have to understand architecture of my family, not the surface version, the holidays and birthday dinners and the way my stepfather used to ruffle my hair when I was 8 and call me his bonus daughter, but the load-bearing structure underneath. The parts nobody talks about. My mother married my stepfather when I was 5, my biological father had left when I was 3, and she was lonely and tired and he was charming in the specific way that exhausted single mothers find irresistible. He had a son from a previous relationship. My half-brother, 6 years older than me, already 10 when I arrived in his life, already certain of his place in the hierarchy. My grandmother on my mother's side, I called her Gran, never trusted my stepfather. She used to squeeze my hand at family dinners and whisper, "You keep your eyes open, baby." I didn't understand what she meant until I was much older. Gran died when I was 26. She left behind a small house in the town where she'd lived her entire life, a savings account with $62,000 in it, and a will that was very specific. The house and the money went to me, not to my mother, not to my stepfather, not to my half-brother, who Gran had always referred to, with a politeness that only barely concealed her feelings, as your mother's stepson, to me. I remember reading that will in the lawyer's office and feeling something I didn't expect. Not joy exactly, but something quieter, like recognition. Like Gran was reaching across whatever comes after death and saying, I saw you. I saw what they were doing. This is for you. I did not move into the house. I was living in another city, building my career, and the rental income was more useful than the square footage. I found a good property manager, put a family in there, and let it be. For 3 years, that was the arrangement, and then my half-brother's business started failing. He'd always had businesses. Schemes, really. A food truck that lasted 8 months, a consulting firm that seemed to consist entirely of a website, a real estate venture that he sold to my stepfather as a sure thing before it collapsed and took $40,000 with it. My stepfather had always funded these adventures. My mother had always helped him smooth things over, and they had always looked at me as though my stability was a resource they were entitled to draw from. I had maintained appropriate distance for years, phone calls every few weeks, visits at Christmas, the minimum necessary to stay connected without being consumed. But when my half-brother's latest venture, a bar he'd opened with borrowed money and managed with the financial discipline of a 19-year-old on spring break, went underwater, I started getting calls. First, it was my mother, just mentioning casually that things were hard, that he was under so much stress, that family was supposed to be there for each other. Then it was my stepfather, calling to talk about Gran's house. Had I thought about selling it? The market was good. He knew a buyer. Very reasonable offer. I knew what the offer would be. I said I wasn't interested in selling. Then came the ultimatum in the kitchen. What my stepfather did not know, what none of them knew, was that I had been watching this pattern build for 6 months. I had started keeping records, not because I was planning anything specific, just because I am who I am, and when I see a financial pressure campaign developing in my direction, my instincts kick in automatically. I document, I preserve, I wait. What I found when I started looking more carefully changed everything. The property manager for Gran's house had been sending rent checks to an account I'd set up when I first inherited the property. But when I pulled the full statement history 8 months earlier, I found a gap. 14 months, starting about a year after Gran died, where the deposits were 40% lower than they should have been. I'd been busy. I'd trusted the system I set up. I hadn't looked closely. I looked closely now. The property manager had been sending full checks. I confirmed it with him directly. He had wire confirmations for every payment. The money was leaving his account and arriving somewhere. But it wasn't arriving in mine. Someone had changed the routing information. It took me 2 weeks to trace it fully. The money had been redirected to an account I didn't recognize. When I ran the account number through the financial tracing software I use for work, it came back to an LLC. The LLC had been registered 18 months after Gran died, using an address I recognized immediately, my mother's house, my stepfather's home, and the registered agent was my half-brother. They had stolen 11 months of rental income from Gran's house. The total was just over $19,000. They had done it by gaining access to the email account I used for property management. I traced it to a password reset that had been initiated from my childhood home's IP address, using my mother's email as the recovery contact, which I had apparently set up years ago and forgotten to change. I sat with that information for a long time. I thought about Gran squeezing my hand at dinner. I thought about the way my stepfather had looked at me in that kitchen, so certain I would fold. I thought about the $40,000 my half-brother had already cost this family and the way everyone had treated it as a natural disaster rather than a choice. And I thought about a conversation I'd had, completely unrelatedly, with a real estate attorney named Mr. Chadwick 8 months earlier. I'd called him to ask about the process of setting up a trust for the property. During that conversation, he'd mentioned something in passing, that if I ever wanted to protect the asset from future complications, I should make sure the deed was clean and the ownership structure was airtight. I had taken his card. I called him now. When I explained what I'd found, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Before we talk about what you want to do about the theft, I want to ask you something. Do you have any reason to believe there may have been attempts to challenge the original will or the deed transfer?" I told him I didn't know. I hadn't thought to check. He checked. There had been a quiet filing, nothing that had proceeded, nothing that had reached me 18 months ago. A preliminary inquiry to the probate court, questioning the mental competency of the deceased at the time the will was signed. It had gone nowhere because Gran's lawyer had responded with documentation that shut it down immediately. But someone had tried. The filing had been initiated by my stepfather. I remember the exact moment Mr. Chadwick read that to me over the phone. I was sitting at my desk in my apartment, the city outside my window, a half-eaten sandwich next to my keyboard. I put the phone down for a moment and looked at nothing. Then I picked it back up and said, "Tell me everything I need to do." What I did next took 4 months. First, I secured the property completely. New property management company, new accounts, new everything. I changed every recovery contact on every account I had ever owned. I did a full audit of my own digital footprint and found 2 other places where my mother's contact information had been attached to accounts that were mine, a utility account from when I'd briefly considered moving back to my hometown, and a bank account I'd opened at 18 and never fully closed. I severed every thread. Second, I compiled the documentation, every wire confirmation from the property manager, the account registration records for the LLC, the IP logs showing the password reset, the redirect instructions that had been added to the property management portal. I built a file the way I build files for clients, chronologically indexed, with a chain of custody notation on every single document. Third, I said nothing. I kept taking the calls from my mother. I kept being vague and noncommittal when my stepfather brought up the house. I let them believe I was just slow to make up my mind. People who believe they're smarter than you are very easy to manage. You just have to let them keep believing it. The morning of the kitchen confrontation, I had driven to my hometown for what my mother had described as a family conversation about the future. I had known what it would actually be. I had worn a plain gray sweater and jeans and left my laptop bag in the car. I needed to look like the daughter who could be pressured, not the auditor who had been building a case against them for 4 months. When my stepfather delivered the ultimatum, I gave them what they needed. I slumped a little. I looked at the floor. I said I needed to think about it, and I watched the tension go out of the room like air from a punctured tire. I drove home that evening. I called Mr. Chadwick from the highway. They made the demand, I said. Recorded. I had set my phone to record the moment I walked through the front door. Yes. Then we're ready, he said. He filed the next morning. The civil complaint covered the $19,000 in redirected rental income, the unauthorized account access, the fraudulent LLC established using my inherited property's address, and the attempted probate challenge. We filed simultaneously with the civil complaint a referral to the State Attorney General's office for wire fraud and computer fraud because the password reset and the account redirect had crossed state lines when the money moved. The process server reached my stepfather at his office on a Tuesday. My half-brother was served at the bar, which was still technically open, running on fumes and whatever goodwill the regulars had left. My mother received her copy at the house. They called me 17 times that day. I let every call go to voicemail. My stepfather left a message that started out threatening and ended up pleading. My half-brother left one that was just shouting. My mother's message was quiet in a way that was worse than the shouting. She said she didn't understand how I could do this to the family. She said Gran would be heartbroken. I listened to all 3 messages once. Then I forwarded them to Mr. Chadwick and didn't listen to them again. 2 weeks later, my stepfather's attorney, a real one, not a strip mall operation, which told me they understood the seriousness now, contacted Mr. Chadwick to request a settlement conference. We agreed. The conference was in Mr. Chadwick's office, 12th floor downtown, a conference room with windows that looked out over the river. My stepfather came in with his attorney and sat across from me, and I watched him look at me the way people look at someone they suddenly can't quite recognize. My half-brother was there too, quieter than I'd ever seen him. Their attorney had clearly explained what the paper trail looked like. Mr. Chadwick opened his folder. He laid out the timeline first. The probate challenge, 18 months after Gran's death. The LLC registration, 6 months after that. The redirect on the property management account, 3 months after that. 11 months of diverted payments, $19,412. My stepfather started to say something about how there had been a misunderstanding about the account information. His attorney touched his arm and he stopped. Then Mr. Chadwick laid out the second piece, the computer fraud referral. The fact that the password reset had been initiated from a specific IP address at a specific time and that my mother's email, listed as recovery contact, had been used to authorize it. That this constituted unauthorized access to a financial account under federal statute. That the wire transfers following that access had crossed state lines. My half-brother's leg was bouncing under the table. I could see it from where I was sitting. Then Mr. Chadwick laid out the third piece. He slid a document across the table. This is a recording made on the morning of March 4th, he said, in the kitchen of your residence, in which you stated that my client should sign the house over to her half-brother or be removed from the family. Combined with the documented pattern of financial interference with her inheritance, this constitutes attempted coercion in connection with an act of fraud. The room was very quiet. Their attorney leaned over and murmured something to my stepfather. My stepfather looked at the table. The settlement took 40 minutes to negotiate. They agreed to repay the full $19,412 plus interest plus legal fees. They agreed to have no further contact with any of my accounts, properties, or financial instruments. They agreed to a no-contact provision, not because I asked for it exactly, but because Mr. Chadwick had structured the agreement so that any further attempt to pressure me regarding Gran's house or any other asset would constitute a violation that would immediately revive the criminal referral. My half-brother signed first. His hand wasn't steady. Then my stepfather, who didn't look at me. Their attorney collected the papers and left quickly. I sat in the conference room for a few minutes after they were gone. Mr. Chadwick gave me space to do that. Outside the window, the river was moving in the late afternoon light, flat and silver, and going somewhere. My mother called while I was still sitting there. I looked at her name on the screen. I thought about the spoon turning in her hands at the kitchen table. I thought about the way she had not looked at me when my stepfather issued his ultimatum. I thought about a lot of things. I let it ring. I walked out of that building and the air was cold and clean and fully mine. The repayment came in 2 installments. I put it in a separate account and used it to fund a structural repair the house needed, the roof, which Gran had been putting off for years. The same house she left me to make sure I had something they couldn't take. I had it repaired and I raised the rent to market rate, and now it pays for itself, and then some. I still have the recording from that kitchen. I have never had to use it again. I suspect I won't need to. But I keep it the way I keep all my documentation: indexed, preserved, ready. My mother texts occasionally. Short things, nothing that requires a response. I don't block her. I don't respond either. Some doors don't need to be slammed, they just need to stay closed. I used to think the hardest part of my job was proving that someone had done something wrong when they'd worked very hard to hide it. I know now that the hardest part is closer to home. It's the moment you stop giving people the benefit of the doubt they have never once extended to you. It's realizing that the most important financial asset you will ever protect is your own future, and that sometimes the people you have to protect it from are the ones who taught you to tie your shoes. Gran knew. She always knew. She just made sure I had something solid to stand on when the day came. I'm standing on it now. I think about Gran a lot these days. Not the way you think about someone you've lost, with that hollow ache that doesn't go anywhere, but the way you think about someone who left you a map. She didn't have much: a small house, some savings, a lifetime of watching quietly and saying little. But she understood something about cause and effect that I was still learning when she died: that what you build with integrity holds, and what you build with integrity holds, and what you build by taking from others eventually collapses under its own weight. She didn't need to lecture me about it. She just made sure I had something solid to stand on when the day came. What happened with my stepfather and my half-brother wasn't bad luck. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the inevitable end of a long pattern. Years of borrowing what wasn't theirs. Years of treating other people's futures as a resource to extract from. The LLC, the redirected rent, the quiet probate challenge filed 18 months after Gran was in the ground, none of that appeared out of nowhere. It was the accumulation of every small choice they had made over years, finally becoming too heavy to hide. That's how it works. Not with lightning bolts and dramatic punishment, but with paper trails and timestamps and the slow, boring weight of documentation. I won't pretend I handled all of it with perfect calm. There were nights during those 4 months of building the file when I sat at my desk and felt something I can only describe as grief. Not for the people who had done this, but for the version of this family that had never really existed. The stepfather who ruffled my hair and called me his bonus daughter. The half-brother I had tried, genuinely tried, to make peace with over the years. The mother who had chosen to look at the spoon in her hands instead of at me. Grief is honest. I let myself feel it. And then I kept working. What got me through wasn't anger, though there was plenty of that underneath. It was the discipline of doing the work correctly. Every document indexed, every chain of custody noted, every piece of evidence preserved the way I would preserve it for a client, because I had learned, professionally and then personally, that the truth doesn't defend itself. You have to build the structure that lets it stand. That requires a kind of clear-eyed rigor that doesn't leave room for self-pity or shortcuts. It requires thinking past the emotion to the evidence. That is a skill. It is also a choice, every single day, to stay honest about what you know and what you can prove. And then there's the part that's harder to talk about, the decision to actually use what I'd built. There's a moment in situations like this where you can still turn back, where you tell yourself it's not worth it. That family is family, that maybe they didn't fully understand what they were doing. I had that moment. I sat with it for a long time, and I decided that protecting what Gran left me, not just the house, but the intention behind it, the act of someone who loved me making sure I had something they couldn't take, was worth more than the comfort of pretending. I'm not the villain in their story. I know that's how they tell it. I also know it doesn't matter. Gran knew what she was doing when she signed that will. She was doing what decent people do, making sure the right thing happened, even when she wouldn't be there to enforce it. She trusted me to carry it forward. I did. That's enough.